Today we have to cover quite a lot of ground. We will actually begin with Spring Boot today. And the first thing I want to talk about is the Spring Facet configuration, which is very necessary to set up the Spring support in your application, in your projects in IntelliJ. And there's a new feature which is much nicer now in the 2016.2 update when it comes to auto-detected configurations. So what are auto-detected configurations? They are setups which IntelliJ IDEA can recognize automatically, and that covers Spring Boot applications as well as Spring MVC applications. You don't need to set up those manually in your Spring Facet. And the new thing in IntelliJ 2016 is that there is a fix to set up default context. I'm sorry, I need to switch back to the default resolution here. There's a problem with the text to see. And there's a quick fix which creates a default context, which by default includes all the available Spring configuration files IntelliJ found in your project. And there was always a problem because that mixed up with the files which should be covered by the auto detection process. And this has been fixed now in 2016.2. So when I create on this create default context here in the notification, I will actually get a warning up here which tells me that IntelliJ found an auto-detected context of type Spring Boot. I have a Spring Boot sample application here, and it will actually just create the facet and let all the auto-detected file sets be added to that automatically. And now I can open the facet here, and I can already see that the Spring Boot application context has been auto-detected. And if necessary, I then can add any other files to my own manually configured context, but it will not interfere those auto-configured files with the auto-created context. Okay, another small detail, but still I think it's quite nice when you use the Spring Initialzr wizard to create a new Spring Boot project. Just using the defaults here, and when you select the starters, we have now this top panel here where you can select the Spring Boot version up here. You can collapse and expand all the available starters here to make it easier to browse them, or you can use the search field here, and it will highlight all matching starters just like you are used from the settings search. And the nice thing is when you, for example, go back to an older version of Spring Boot, like the 1.3 release, some starters might not be available in that version. And when you just hover over those starters, you will see a tooltip, which not only gives you a bit longer description of what the starter is about, but also show you what Spring Boot version is required for the starter to be available in your project. So that's a nice way to find out why something is not available. So maybe Stefan can tell us a bit more what is new in Spring Boot 1.4, which has been released like just last week. Is that correct?
Yeah, indeed. Hello, everyone. Spring Boot 1.4 was released last week, indeed. You can see on the top there is this reactive web experimental starter. So what we're trying to do with it is to allow you to try the new reactive initiative using Spring Framework 5. So we've released the first milestone last week as well. So if you want to try that early access, you can do so. And we also added a couple of NoSQL store support in 1.4. So mainly that's Couchbase and Neo4j. So you can find them now in the starter wizard. We've also added a bunch of new features in 1.4, like failure analyzer. So if your Spring Boot application fails to start, we analyze the exception and we try to give you a dedicated error message. We also improve a lot the testing support with slicing, so the ability to only start part of your context and focus on only one layer of your application. So for instance, you could have a test that's using mock MVC for a controller, and that's going only to load the context for that particular controller. We've done that for many things, like you have the same for the data layer with the data JPA test. We have that for pure REST client with the REST client test annotation. And there is more than that. And in general, the testing support is much easier to configure now.
Okay, thanks a lot, Stefan, for that update. Everyone should really go and try out the new 1.4 features. Another last small bit about the Spring Initializer wizard. When we go back to the first page, you can select between Maven and Gradle projects, and now when you create a Gradle project, IntelliJ IDEA will also automatically add the necessary Spring Facet automatically to your project. So that's the same support we had for the Maven project for a long time. Same stuff now working for Gradle. So now I can switch to the presentation mode. Going to the application properties support, the configuration files for Spring Boot. We see here just one property, which is strike true marked, so it's a deprecated property. IntelliJ warns us about this. There's also a quick fix to replace it with any new property, which is the deprecation replacement. And one nice new thing is when you open the documentation for that configuration property now, you can also click on the replacement name property and see the documentation for the new replacement config key without having to insert it into your application.properties. There have been a couple of fixes for application properties and application YAML support in general. We improved the support for some a bit more exotic ways of noting the configuration keys. Spring Boot allows a variety of notations, for example, upper, lowercase, mixture, and stuff like that. We are much better now in supporting a bit more exotic variations of that. When you use automake in IntelliJ IDEA, which can be configured in the compiler settings, make project automatically, this supports now projects which create local Spring metadata using the add configuration properties correctly. There was a problem with that before. This has been fixed now. Okay, that's all we have to show about Spring Boot in the latest release, and I'm going to switch now to a different project for the other stuff. And we are going to start with Spring caching. So Stefan, what is Spring caching about?
So the caching abstraction in Spring Framework it's not new really. It's been there for a while, and we've improved the support in the latest 4.x line. So basically, the caching infrastructure allows you to tag methods, bin methods, as to include a cache aspect. And when you do so, Spring will automatically check if the value that's been computed by the method has already been cached beforehand. So Jan, maybe you can open a class which has some cacheable annotation on it so that we can, okay, that one. So if we look at this one, which is a bad example because it's on an interface, but we will discuss that in a minute. So you have this built-in integer list that returns a list of integer, and it takes a start and end parameter. If you add this annotation on your bin methods, the default behavior is to compute a key based on the start and the end value. And whenever you invoke that method in your code, there is the cache aspect which will first check if that key is available in the cache name, my cache name. If that's the case, the method will not even be invoked. So you'll get the entry in the cache directly. If it isn't, we will invoke the method as usual, and before returning the value to the caller, we will also update the cache so that our next call with the same start and end parameter have a chance to hit the cache instead.
Okay, thanks, Stefan, for that introduction to Spring Caching. So as you said, we have the cacheable annotation here on the interface, and there's a warning from IntelliJ IDEA. That's a new inspection. Why does Spring not recommend to annotate the interface here?
So yeah, before I reply to that, I think that these new inspections are really great because it's a way for us to promote some best practices via the IDE. So the tools that you're using to code give you an immediate feedback about things you're doing, and also advice on how to design your components. In this particular case, the reason why we've added this inspection is because you shouldn't put implementation details on the interface. This is really an implementation detail, and you may have an implementation of this service that does not require caching at all for whatever reason. If you put them on the interface, however, there is really no way to disable that, and it's an implementation detail that becomes the default.
Okay, right. So let's follow the advice of the inspection and the best practices, disabling this annotation on the interface, and let's have a look at the actual implementation here. So we have this service here, which implements our caching service, and the method built integer list. So now I'm putting the cacheable annotation on the implementation, just like the inspection told us, but there's still a problem here, and IntelliJ warns us that we should provide a cache name, which is basically like a key or hash key to store results from the caching, and for Spring to look it up and return the cached results instead of the invocation. Stefan.
Yeah, so this is again how the IDE can really help us and really help you to figure out about the features that has evolved over time. Initially, when the caching abstraction was introduced, the cache name, so the name of the cache that should be used for that particular method, was a mandatory attribute. So whenever you use cacheable, and if you didn't provide a cache name attribute, your code wouldn't compile. So it was really easy for you to realize that something was wrong. In the meantime, the community asked us to improve the currency report, and you can basically see that at class level there is this cache config annotation. So one of the things that the community asked us to improve was a way to externalize the name of the cache to use. For one, you can put cache config at class level now. It's been a while, but if you do so, any cache method on that class will use the caching service cache, so you don't have to repeat that value over and over again. Next, which is not on this code, there is an extra attribute that we've introduced called cache resolver, and cache resolver is a name of a bean, just like the custom cache manager attribute there. And if you specify it, we will invoke the bean, so the cache resolver implementation, and you'll have a chance to compute the cache name to use at runtime. So long story short, there's many ways to specify the cache name now, and the attribute can't be mandatory anymore. So we needed a way to warn you about, hey, this class has no name whatsoever. Are you sure that's really what you want? So it's really great that the IDE gives support for that.
Okay, Stefan, so we are going to uncomment the class level cache config annotation here, which does define the cache names, and immediately the inspection goes away, just as expected. So we have a couple of attributes here, like the cache manager, the key generator, and those actually resolve two custom implementation beans you can provide for the Spring caching to pick up. And of course, we have auto-completion here. As usual, you can control-click here to go there and go back to the config node to the service again. For a minute, let's just remove the cache names attribute from the class level and put it on this method here. And what I'm going to do now is introduce another method just for demonstration period purposes. It should probably have the same return type. And just return dummy value here and add the same cacheable annotation on this method as well. So we have now two methods which use the same cache name. And you could see that IntelliJ immediately adds a new gutter icon here, which allows you to go to other cacheable annotations which use the same cache name. So when I duplicate this once again, give it a second name, I can actually get a list of all the methods annotated with cacheable using the same cache name, and I can quickly navigate between them to make sure that they actually should be in the same group. Okay, that's about the navigation for cacheable. And just a quick note, you can also provide your own meta annotation of cacheable. So you can add maybe some custom attributes there, or use Initialzr to redefine the existing attributes. All the support we have here will also work for your custom meta annotation as well. So let's jump into the next topic, which is Spring EL, or just Spell. Spring EL is an expression language provided by the Spring framework and which is used throughout all the Spring subprojects. And it allows you to define runtime conditions or evaluations at various points. So we can see that this condition attribute here has some slightly different background color. And this hints us to the fact that here we find a spell expression, which actually defines the condition that should be evaluated at runtime. And one thing that we improved a lot now is that we use context-dependent variables, or we can use context-dependent variables. So for example, this cacheable annotation knows about the parameters we have here on this method. So I can actually control click here and go to the parameter, which is automatically resolved in this spell expression. This, of course, means that we have auto-completion for the parameters here as well. Stefan wants to add some bit here.
Yeah. If you look at the if you open the condition Java doc, if you open the pop-up, maybe to show to the audience here, if you scroll a bit, you'll see that this Java doc is actually quite extensive, explaining you what the context for this particular Spring expression language support is. So you can see that you can access to the method, you can access to the target, which is the target instance. You can access to the caches that are going to be used for that method. And the root context actually changes from one expression support to the other. We will see that in a minute. So this is really great that we have auto-completion support for Spell now, because that way you get actually assistance of what we support, the kind of variables that you can use in your Spell expression.
Right. Stefan just mentioned the context-dependent root variables or root objects, and as we can see, the root object is actually known here and set to the proper type, which will be used at runtime by Spring. And of course, we can access all the properties from that object as well. So that's a very nice way to just get very nice context dependent assistance, completion, navigation in all the spell expression places. This also works now in Spring Security. So for Spring Security, we have various annotations where we support spell as well. Let's just quickly jump to one very simple sample here using the add pre-authorize annotation. And as you can see, there is a hasRole method which is called here. And again, this is the root object which is provided by Spring Security at runtime for the spell context. And we have again autocompletion here for all the methods, for example, we have here. And yeah, it's just a nice way to make sure you don't mistype or miss any of the nice features which are actually available in this spell context. Of course, you can use quick documentation on any of the method calls. But the nice new thing is that we added in spell language support is now we support also the show parameter info shortcut. So when I use command P, I can actually see the parameters this method has to offer. Let's just use one with a bit more parameters, and you can just use it as you know it from Java or any other programming languages which has this feature. Another nice thing which was improved massively for the spell support in 2016.2 is improved autocompletion. So we have all the keywords here. We have very nice autocompletion, for example, for the type reference. So I just type T and tab, and it will automatically switch to the class name. So I can provide the class name here, just anything. And of course, you can navigate to the class again, use the JavaDoc feature. And this even works for renaming. So when you refer to one class in your project and you rename that class, all these references will be updated, as you would expect from IntelliJ, of course. Autocompletion is also improved when you type special characters. So when you type this sign, it will automatically pop up the autocompletion menu, so you can continue typing here. The same is true for the @. And on top of that, there have been many dozens of fixes to the parsing and evaluation of the spell expressions. So for example, we support now inline maps notation. This is something where you can put a key with a value just inside your spell expression, and it will create a map on the fly at this point. Another thing which is now properly parsed are hexadecimal numbers. They start with 0x. And I actually learned that that the keywords are actually case insensitive. So if you prefer to write uppercase true instead of lowercase true, that's now properly parsed as well. There have been literally dozens of fixes, so if your spell expression maybe had some problems before, give it a try. I hope it's fixed by now. Another big new feature in the spell language support is now we have a dedicated color settings page for the spell language. So if, for example, you don't like the default color scheme, we can just, for example, change the keyword highlighting and choose a bit different color like this, and you can see it in the preview, the colors picked up, and this affects now really only the spell language. Previously it was using the same settings as the JSP expression language, but because the Spring EL language has so many more features than the JSP EL language had, we finally added a dedicated settings page just for that language. So that's all from spell from me, but Stefan wants to add a bit.
Yeah, if you could open that panel again, I have an advice for you guys, is to trigger the background color for the spell expression. So if you do that, you'll see that in a minute when Jan enables this. every spell expression in your code will have a dedicated background color. The nice thing about that is IntelliJ IDEA will automatically recognizes the places where you can actually use spell expression. So if you happen to try a new feature of the framework and you open this attribute you don't know about, and if you start typing, you'll immediately see one, that it's a spell expression, and two, what kind of features you can use with it. So it's really assistance directly in the IDE for that stuff. It's really great.
Right, yeah, that's a nice tip from Stefan. By the way, you can use the language injection feature in IntelliJ IDEA. Make sure the plugin is enabled. It allows you to inject custom languages in any of the supported places. One of those places are string literals. So, for example, if I add a custom attribute in my meta annotation, which should be spell enabled, I can just use Alt-Enter and use the inject language or reference feature to make IntelliJ know that this attribute is actually a spell language expression, and you will receive all the spell highlighting and auto-completion in those places as well. So that's a nice thing if you add some custom stuff in annotations or in XML. That's also supported. Okay, so much about the Spring EL support. Next topic, Spring Core. So the Spring framework itself. One thing improved a lot is the overall performance when you have multiple projects open simultaneously. The overall highlighting performance will just be much better now. And let's go into a sample configuration, which will showcase a new inspection we added in the latest release, which is about auto-wiring. And you can see that in this configuration class, let's just focus on this auto-wired field here. There's a new inspection which actually highlights the auto-wired annotation itself, stating that field injection is not recommended. Stefan, can you tell us a bit more about this, please?
Of course I can. So the auto-wiring a field has been like something we discouraged for quite some time now. We even have one of our team member writing a blog post years ago about it. The reason why we don't recommend it is because there is a lifecycle issue attached to it. If, for instance, since it's a field, you expect that field to be available in the constructor, right? So if you auto-wire a field like that and you want to access it in the constructor, you'll get a null pointer exception. The reason why is to be able to set the field using reflection, we actually need a bean instance to be able to do so. So the first thing that we'll do is actually create the instance of the bean, and right after, using reflection, set the value of the field itself. So it's really a weird life cycle. It's really not something that you would expect to work like that. And also, we have added constructor injection on across the board in 4.3, so you can use constructor injection in configuration classes now. So there's really no reason to use field injection on production code. In test, personally, I use field injection quite a lot because there isn't really this issue of having a constructor in a test. So this is easier on the eye to do it in test, and IntelliJ won't warn you in test either.
Right. So we have this warning here from IntelliJ, and of course, the first step you do when you see a warning is to hit Alt-Enter to see if there's a quick fix, and of course there is one, which is to change that auto-wired on the field itself to constructor injection, just like Stefan explained. So when I invoke this, the auto-wired annotation will be moved to the constructor, and the field will be set in the constructor. And one thing you can do when you have only one constructor in your configuration class is actually also to remove the auto-wired annotation from the constructor itself. So your code looks a bit less Spring injected than before. Okay, another topic about auto-wiring is support for generics. So we have here another configuration which requires two parameters in the construction for auto-wiring. Again, the auto-wired annotation is not mandatory here anymore. We only have one constructor. So I have this repository interface, which receives type parameter. And I have two types here, one employee, one department, and both are defined as member variables in this configuration. The beans are provided in the same configuration class just for demonstration purposes. And as you can see, there are now two auto-wired dependencies gutter icons here. And IntelliJ will now correctly resolve according to the generic type, which is marked as the type parameter of the repository here. So the employee repository, which I can navigate using this icon, will be correctly resolved when I go back from the department repository bean definition to the places where it is used as an auto-wired candidate. It will not show me, okay, there's a bug apparently, but the other way around it works. Sorry, that's of course demonstration. Okay, another topic are event listeners. And those have been supported in previous version of IntelliJ already. We improved the support a bit for custom meta annotations for event listeners. So here I have my custom event listener annotation, which inherits from the original Spring event listener annotation. And when I go to the place where it's actually used, I use the event listener annotation here. Again, we have the spell support. We can see this very nicely using the custom nice on the eye background color we set before. And when I use my custom event listener annotation, where I redefined the condition attribute to be a different name, you can see the spell support works just the same as in the standard Spring annotation. So let's go back quickly to the main configuration. We have apparently some problem here in the auto-wiring process because there are multiple beans which would match the candidates. And this is of course done intentionally for demonstration purposes. So when I try to run this main configuration, the Spring context will of course fail to start up because there's an unsatisfied dependency here. And the nice thing is now in these console tags, we will detect some specific error messages which are provided by the Spring framework. For example, error creating bean with name. And as soon as we find those error messages in the run console, we will pass them and allow you to actually control click here and go to the corresponding bean, because IntelliJ knows where your beans are and how they are named. So that's a nice way when your application fails to start after some changes to quickly go to the places where something is apparently wrong. And most probably IntelliJ will also have the corresponding inspection for you and help you fixing it.
Yeah, I was about to say that Jan and I had a nice chat yesterday preparing the webinar, and we were looking at some of the error message that Spring Framework and Spring Boot are producing, and we already found together a few new inspections that could be added to IntelliJ IDEA. So maybe you'll find some yourself, and feel free to report that to your track, and it might be added in a future release of IntelliJ.
Right. Another common error is the message could not auto-wire bean. That will be passed as well, just the same way as we had for the error creating bean. Okay, a quick excursion to a somewhat more special or not so commonly used topic, which is improved support for the spring.factories file. And Stefan can tell us a bit more what the spring.factories files are about.
So this is a generic SPI from Spring Framework that allows you to load implementation of a certain interface or load certain components easily. So we use that internally, for instance, in Spring Framework, to allow you to register an application listener as part of a jar and make sure that application listener will be invoked automatically, even though you did not register it on the context yourself. So basically, if you have an application listener and you want to make sure it's going to be invoked, you create a Spring Factories at a certain place and you register your implementation, in this case, my application listener, in that file. Spring Framework will scan all Spring Factories file from the class path and will automatically register components. This is how Spring Boot auto configuration is working, by the way. So if you want to create your own auto configuration, you need to tell Spring Boot to actually invoke it on startup if there are beans that needs to be created. And the way you do this in Spring Boot is to register your auto configuration fully qualified name using a given key. So in this case, if we look at this new icon next to the class and we click on it, we'll actually navigate to the Spring Factories defined on that module. There you can find the key. So in this case, this is the standard key in Spring Framework to register listeners. And you'll see the fully qualified name of the class. So Jan can maybe show us now more inspections about that.
Yes, of course, you can control click here again to go back to the actual class using the qualified name. Of course, refactoring works again here. And IntelliJ also knows about some default keys. So the other one, for example, which is available in the Spring Core framework is the application context initializer. So that's another predefined key. There are others for Spring Boot, the ones Stefan just mentioned. They will be available automatically depending on the availability of the Spring libraries in your project. Okay, so much about the Spring Factory support. Let's jump into Spring MVC now. So here we have a very basic Spring MVC controller with two request mappings, and we have one here just called perform, and that's what I call old school because it's using a JSP page for the view. So this icon here has always been existing. It allows you to navigate to the related view or to the related views which are used in this request mapping. You can also use control click here on the view name in the constructor of the model and view to navigate to the resolved JSP page. We always supported resolving attributes which are provided within the request mapping method. So we can actually see that this attribute we put into the model and view map here available in our JSP-EL context. I can control click here and go to the actual definition of that variable. This now works also in velocity and free marker. So in the second request mapping, which is a bit more up to date, we use free marker. Again, you can control click here or use the gutter icon to navigate to the related views. My preferred way actually of navigating to that is using the navigate related symbol shortcut, which is a generic shortcut to navigate to anything that is somehow related to the current invocation context. So this shortcut actually works in a number of places, also for Spring Beans, for example, to quickly show you, for example, related other beans, auto wiring candidates and stuff like that. So when I do that, it will actually propose me the corresponding free marker view. And now we also support resolving those attributes in free marker and velocity. A nice trick to see a bit more about this attribute is actually to use the show quick definition shortcut, Control-Shift-E, and that actually shows you the navigation target, but without leaving the current editor. So you get a pop-up which shows you the same as if you would navigate to the actual code. Spring MVC support has received a number of fixes for the add model attribute handling. And another nice little touch we added here is when you put the method attribute here to limit the request mapping to certain HTTP methods. This has always shown in the Spring MVC tool window. So when I list the request mappings here, you can clearly see the get request mapping here in the brackets, and they are also shown in the quick doc. This is also shown now in the go to symbol navigation dialog. So when I use Command Alt-Shift-N for go to symbol, and when I type a /, I can see all the registered request mappings in my project. And now the request methods will also be shown in this navigation pop-up. So if you have multiple request mappings with the same path, but using different HTTP methods, it's now much easier to distinguish them in this pop-up. So that's about it for Spring MVC, and actually we are finished with showing all the new stuff or updated stuff we added in 2016.2. So naturally, before we jump into Q&A, we would like to give you a short update on the plans for 2016.3, which will be released later in fall this year. So again, let's start with Spring Boot. Spring Boot 1.4 support has a new, much extended support for testing, as Stefan told us in the beginning. So we are going to support all the new Spring Boot testing annotations. So the bean resolving and stuff like that will work just like in the plain Spring Core context configuration setups. The next and probably biggest topic is to make the Spring MVC support work for Spring Boot applications, so that you can enjoy the same level of support, for example, navigating to request mappings, resolving for model attributes, as we just saw, as well for Spring Boot applications. You might have heard of Kotlin, the JVM programming language, which is quite new. It was just released this year, the final 1.0 released, and it has been received very well in the community. And actually, the Spring Boot guys really seem to love it. So when you go to start.spring.io, you can actually create a Kotlin Spring Boot template application. And naturally, we want to extend the existing support for all the annotation, all the highlightings, and all the completion features we already have for Java with any of the Spring frameworks to Kotlin as well. So right now, the support for Spring using Kotlin code is bundled within the Kotlin plugin itself, which has some drawbacks, but right now it's the only solution. So we are planning actually to extend the existing support we have for Java step by step to make it language agnostic. So all the inspections, navigation features will actually work with Kotlin code as well. Another big topic is supporting better navigation for test contexts. So right now, the Spring tool window and the Spring Facet and all the navigation for beans just include the production contexts you set up in the Spring Facet. All the test contexts are implicit using the given annotations in your testing class. You can navigate to the config files, but you cannot actually see the resulting beans for your test. So that's one really missing feature we are going to add in the next release. Last but not least, we have already worked on some quite impressive performance improvements in the Spring support, meaning that anytime you type something in any editor, we will have much less cache invalidations in our Spring model we built ourselves to actually understand what your project is doing. So you will hopefully enjoy a much improved general performance, not only with highlighting, but in general, the whole IDE will be faster in the next release. And the early access for 2016.3 should actually start later this month, and you are all very much invited to give it a try. And please let us know feedback. And yeah, vote, comment on the existing issues, or please file new issues. We are very happy to hear from you, hear about your problems, your wishes. And yes, that's it for now. So time for Q&A.
Thanks, Jan and Stefan, for a very solid overview. Let's see what questions we have. In fact, not many. There's a question from Thomas about an option in a run configuration similar to on-frame deactivation, which we have for instance, for Tomcat. The question is whether we want to add it to Spring Boot launcher as well. Jan, do you have anything to tell about it?
Yes, thanks for the question. So yes, that's definitely one of the missing features in the Spring Boot run configuration when you compare it to using the plain Tomcat run configuration, which allows in-place updates of resources. We are going to add this. We are also planning to improve the somewhat hidden but still working support for the Spring Boot dev tools, which allows much more than just reloading resources or view files. Namely, it allows you to replace code on the fly in most ways. We are still discussing how to do this properly, but there are definitely plans to do this.
Thanks, Jan. Looks like we have no more questions at the moment. But if some of you still have questions, feel free to ask them in Twitter or just share them in comments to our blog post where we will publish the recording. So I think that's it. Thanks, Jan and Stefan, for great presentation, and thanks everyone for watching us.